Hello, hello. I hope all of you are well, and thank you for tuning in. Nonetheless, we are going to go through the lesson tonight, and I will give you the 3 points. I don't know if I did that Sunday. I feel like I did it.
I got 3 points.
I gave them as I preached them.
There we
like
go.
Old school, you know what I mean? But tonight we're in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26. Once again, I am in the New King James Version. And I didn't even fix typos in this message, just so you know. I read it, and it was written a while ago. But, man, it works. And I know the themes that I was studying when I did this. And so as we're going through it, tonight's lesson is also called Attitude 101. So we're going to talk about hatred. And sometimes we don't even understand that we do. But it comes spilling out in ways that we don't really know when and where if we haven't dealt with it prior. But nonetheless, it does happen. And so let me give you the 3 points tonight. 1, our heart must yield all to Christ, verses 21 through 22. Our heart must yield all to Christ. Why is that important? Because value actually rests in the hands of the Father. It doesn't rest in you and I or our opinion. It doesn't mean that opinions don't have value, but I would invite you into the discussion or the idea that biblical opinions are going to be the ones that actually hold weight. And you notice this with Paul, when he writes sometimes he'll say, not I, but the Lord says, and not the Lord, but I. And so he gives an opinion based on his understanding of times and seasons. And I think that comes through submission. There's an understanding, a clarity that comes because anger, well, it's one of the points tonight. Anger destroys discernment. Why is that? Because its focus moves from the will of God to ours because we're demanding justice. So maybe there's some issues in your life tonight, considering point 1, that you're holding off because you believe that maybe you can negotiate with God or maybe there's a better alternative. But as I mentioned on Sunday, if anxiety and not conspiracy, what is the word I'm looking for? But nonetheless, a conspiratorial mindset all the time, let's do that, is ruling you. It typically has to do with your grasp of God and your understanding of what he's going to give and what he's going to do. Point 2 tonight, obedience will call us to reconciliation, verses 23 through 24. Obedience will call us to reconciliation. In reconciliation, you have to keep this in mind. You are not doing what you are doing for your own sake. And it's not meaning that everything's going to be better. Doesn't mean that. What you're doing, though, is you're getting out of the way so God can deal with issues, and you're approaching him with clean hands. Hatred is kind of an interesting thing. I was looking through something the other day, and they were mentioning how detrimental and how significant forgiveness is as it relates to our health. And once we allow the wrong things to take root in us, they'll do things to us psychologically, but they'll also do things to us physically. And this doctor was talking about how unforgiveness can actually manifest as cancer, just because we're pumping ourselves full of all the wrong thoughts and feelings. Point 3 this morning, restoration is learned through humility, not assumption. Restoration is learned through humility, not assumption. This is where sincerity comes in. I find, and I don't at all want to be rude about this, but I find that people are often willing to move past certain things because of assumption. And I'm not saying that you don't forgive. Of course you do. I'm not saying that you don't surrender it to God. Of course you do. But there's also boundaries you put up. And once once certain things are understood, they're very difficult to overcome unless, of course, we lovingly, we approach them with the absence of intellect, like we just do feelings. Does that make sense? Is that rude? I hope it's not rude, but I do mean it. In this, we're not thinking through the process, we're feeling through the process, and we're imagining what it would be like once we're on the other side of this. And so we fail to do the deep work and the true work. Like, we have tentative agreements and both parties are assuming certain things, but there's nothing actually shared yet. There's nothing actually shared yet. And I've sat in rooms with individuals where it has been clear to me nobody likes anybody. And yet they pretend as they do. And they say, well, how do you know that? Because, well, one, if you spend any time doing what I used to do for a living, you learn a lot about body language. And very often things are about what is not said versus what is said. And so the more people do the high pitch and all the other things with regard to introductions and so on and so forth, and it's not to ruin the day for bubbly personalities, but it is to say, listen, regularly a show is put on when certain things are out of balance. And in that, the victim, the injured, whatever title you want to give them, they are expected to be silent, and they are ignored for the sake of the process, whatever that may be. So let's jump in. We're going to read it. It's a short section, 21 through 26. In the New King James, it throws in this: murder begins in the heart. That's the caption it gives. Sunday morning, we're going to talk about adultery. And we're going to talk about some things that will probably get kind of serious. I don't normally get serious in my sermons. Wow. Ange, that was almost, you react as if I was being insincere or joking. Verse 21, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you. Now, it's important. Boundaries are important. Listen, leave your gift, therefore, before the altar and go on your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge. The judge hand you over to the officer, and you will be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the last penny. What is Jesus laying out here? Well, he says very clearly that there are things that do give cause for the sake of anger. It's not as if you can never be angry with somebody. But his issue here and what he's outlining, it sounds a lot like jealousy and just unabated rage. And so if we look at point 1 tonight, which is our heart must yield all to Christ, 21 through 22, we know that the word talks about fits of rage. Now, people go through things. There are difficulties and struggles that people face in their life. There's times where maybe you're not as caught up on sleep as you need to be, or full, you may be hungry, may have blood sugar, maybe whatever it is. That people are not on their best game. That stuff comes and goes. That's where grace is applied. But if that's a consistent habit of poor behavior, then it has nothing to do with all of those other things. It basically, that person is never planning to be a servant. Does that make sense? If a person's behavior is constantly bad and there is always an excuse, that person is never planning to be a servant. See, value rests in the hands of the Father. It does not rest in your mind. We can give value judgments, of course, and the Word talks about that with the inspection of fruit and understanding what is right and good. Things are to be tested. They are to be known. People are to be evaluated. All of that is true. That's what the pastoral books are about. But we do not come to the place of clarity through anger and rage. Because the angry, we talk about this, they have short memories, they major on the minors, they are always the victim, and they only appreciate rage. Angry people will resort to bullying when they run out of words, right? Their frustration levels are high, or any number of things. This is why, as Christians, and I've talked about this, listening to this doctor this last week, talk about counseling. He says one of the first things he tries to get people to do when they're dealing with whatever disorder you want to talk about, and there was some particular ones that he discussed, but he gets them to slow down. And if we are angry, we typically live in a comparative mindset. And it'll burn its way in to the point that that is the pathway through which we evaluate everything. It makes it very difficult to approach things in a Christ-like manner. When we read this word here, raka, this word translated means empty or worthless idiot. And here's the thing about sitting in certain circumstances, mindset-wise. If everyone else is always wrong, are we ever in the need of correction? Now, I pray that we come to the place that we need less and less correction. But there are times, there are places where correction will come. And maybe it's a new issue. Maybe it's a new issue based on an old issue, or maybe it's just an old issue. All right. But nonetheless, these things get confronted. And if you remember Peter being confronted by Paul, it wasn't the most comfortable circumstance. I mean, Peter got called out in front of everyone. That can't be comfortable. It can't be easy. And when we get called out, or when we get dealt with in a confrontational way, and it's not as if I'm encouraging that all the time, but nonetheless, we have some choices to make with regard to who we're going to be and how we're going to approach the next season. And if we are not careful, we will look to rebellion, okay, to gain victory when we're confronted. If we're not prayerful about the process, if we're not upset and or feel shame or guilt or some other thing, the voice of darkness will speak rebellion as a way to get even. And people get Machiavellian. I don't know if you're familiar with that terminology, but they will undercut maybe Sun Tzu, Art of War. You know, if you haven't read these books or you don't know what I'm talking about, fantastic, because they're terrible. And I remember pastors talking about the Art of War. I read that book and I thought, this isn't complicated. It's not complicated to be duplicit and underhanded. It's not. It's incredibly lazy and easy. It's far more difficult and at times far more disappointing to try to build. If victory to you comes through being underhanded, that's easy. You can win a lot until you run into the really smart ones that'll trample you. But nonetheless, destruction is simple. Destruction is simple. It really is. It really is. So we are not called to operate in anger, but we are to operate with love and with wisdom. And this is the issue with anger. To an angry heart, rebellion looks like victory, and angry hearts will only appreciate rage. And there's sometimes whether you're parenting or your accountability structure, there are some times where there will be a situation that needs to be met in a certain way. And those should be reserved. They should be rare. I mean, if a pastor, a shepherd is always just a lily pad and doesn't deal with anything, well, that's pathetic. If, however, the dude is like a rat on crack and has to like tear into everything, that is another issue. As a pastor, I don't want to be in all of your business. I think that many of you, and I'm proud of so many of you who have overcome the things that you have and looked for counsel and consideration in the process of certain things, struggled, been through difficulties in a number of things. My goal as a shepherd is to do that, which is to keep you safe and to keep you part of the flock as much as it depends on me, and to make sure that in that process you have the opportunity to learn. You're not always told what to do. You're given instruction, but you're not lorded over, and you're not dominated. And in that aspect of domination, it's not fitting of a shepherd. Okay? It's not. If everything is a 10 and nothing's ever a 3, I think the issue's with the shepherd. Turn your Bible to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 13 through 18. So our part in this life is submission. And speaking of submission, I missed jiu-jitsu tonight. I am mourning that. It's okay. We'll be all right. I'll get through it. But I'm going tomorrow. Maybe even Friday. I don't know. So Paul in this, speaking to the Gentiles in the church about the work of Christ. Once they were considered far off, but now they are close. So here we go, verse 13. But now in Christ Jesus, you who formerly were far off, have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who made both groups into one group and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall by abolishing in his flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in the ordinances, so that in himself he might make the two into one new man, thus establishing peace, and might reconcile them both in one body to God through the cross, by it having put to death the enmity. And he came and preached peace to you who were far off, and peace to those who were near. And for through him we both have access in one spirit to the Father. See, reconciliation, when done right, brings what is far off, and even it points what is near to a place of understanding. I think this is peacemaking. That's what I think it is. And you can't impart what you don't have. And if you are not one that operates in peace, you got to get to the root of it and figure out why. If your days are not, some people think that's boring. If they're not flatline, just keep your wings flat and keep cruising. And many times people thrive on the ups and downs. They want the dopamine hit. It's not very disciplined. It's not very disciplined. Point 2, obedience will call us to reconciliation, 23 and 24 of Matthew chapter 5. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go on your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Now, this is an attitude of submission. It's not one that is oblivious or ignoring. Literally, you're coming to a place and God quickens your heart and mind to say, hey, this is contingent on you. And to be reconciled with that individual as much as it depends on you. If you've committed a wrong and it is rejected by the other party as it relates to the reestablishing of communion or whatever else, maybe things have gone too far. And instead of pushing, you say what it is that you know needs to be said. There are times you're going to have to say things that cut you to the quick, and that's probably the best thing for us in those moments where we're not holding back and we're not afraid of exposing ourselves to injury or rejection, but we're doing and saying the things that God has done. And it is important. It is important in the process of reconciliation that manipulation never plays a role. As soon as it becomes manipulative, it's probably over. And your gift is not going to work at that altar. And it will begin to consume you and break you down. It just works like that. And you can't outrun the weight of it. You can't. If the Lord brings that to heart and mind, then do as he has called you to do. Do as he has called you to do. If the Spirit of God is in you, then there is no real injury in the process of seeking forgiveness and restitution and restoration. There's not. The worst thing you could possibly do is to avoid it as it relates to setting things right. You say, well, what if I call a person? I've had this in my life. What if I tell them I'm sorry for the way I behaved and they don't say anything back? What if I leave that conversation and they think they're right? You know what the Lord told me? You're really concerned about what they think? I'm the one that asked you to do it. So I did it. Even if our sincere attempts are rejected, it moves us into alliance with God and it will heal us. So even if a wrong, oh man, listen, and I want to say this because I'm going to. If you have a repeated process that a cycle you go through in the sense of wronging people, and it's discernible, it's not accidental, and I don't exactly know what you would expect from others, including God. I think that as we mature, it is important that when we were a child, we behaved as a child, but when we became an adult, we start adulting. And adults take responsibility for their behavior. If you're passing the buck onto someone else and you're putting that weight on them, whether it be a friend, brother, sister, father, mother, marriage, children, you name it, you will exhaust that party to the point where the fallout, even if that person acts off the chain, out of pocket, whatever else, the fallout, there's ownership in it. There's ownership, especially if you're the covering of the house, men. There's ownership. Do not make your wife responsible for your emotions. You leave her without cover and you destroy any opportunity to lead. She may come along, but she will constantly be in fear of what you will need. You're the provider. You're the provider. Let's move. The response of the other party is not our responsibility. Our response is to God. This is the part about manipulation. Declarations without intent are manipulative and evil. In essence, do not make promises you do not intend to keep, and do not leverage in these situations. There needs to be an open format of communication that exists within love and that is reasonable. Reconciliation does not happen overnight. Many of these things, people can be confused, sure, but the majority of time, I don't think people are confused. I think people end up out over their skis. This is my perception. I think people get out over their skis and they get far too invested in expressing what's going on within them instead of, if you will, moderating that. Like, what would it take to discover what is going on in our heart and our mind before we ever even express it? Okay? Where do you do that? How do you do that? You ready? You slow down. Power is not determined by man, but power is determined by God. We cannot be people of words because there is no power in just speech, right? But there is power in actual power. So we're not to be just people of words, but instead we must be people of power. We assume worship is power, but it is not. It is in fact found in sacrifice. If we minister for the approval of any man, we will be shattered and disappointed. If we minister for the glory of God, then even the greatest rejections will ultimately produce blessing. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17 through 19, Paul writes this: Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creature. The old things passed away. Behold, new things have come. Now all these things are from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. Namely, that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and he has committed to us the word of reconciliation. The last point tonight. Restoration is learned through humility, not assumption. Verses 25 and 26, agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Now, we remember not too long ago, we had a discussion like this, right? Where a king had settled a debt or was settling debts, and he brought a servant who could not pay. He was going to have him thrown in jail and all this other stuff till it was paid, sell off his family, all of his possessions. He begged and he begged and he pleaded and compassion was had for him. And then he goes out, and where he was owing millions, he beats up a dude for $50 and has him thrown in jail. Then it is seen by the other slaves who report to the authority who had shown compassion. And then what happens? He revokes, takes back the compassion. Here's the part of assumption. Many times we assume, because we are what we are, that when we're involved in a situation, it'll get better. That we're entitled to a certain amount of cover and grace and leniency because of our history or our past or whatever, even deficiencies. Okay, that's an assumption. That's not a proper mindset, whatever it may be. See, for a Christian, we do not enter into relationship to ask. We enter in relationship to give. We enter into relationship to serve. It is better to give than receive. Yes? No? Yes. Okay. People say, why do you do that? And it's because I know people are flipping switches at points in times. Where am I at in this? And what am I thinking? The answer is yes. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the last penny. And this is, I think there's enough of these stories that some people would say, well, that's not about that as it relates to salvation. I think that in many cases, we look at the life of Christ and this idea of grace, which is unmerited favor, as a leniency, in the sense that we can expect or assume forgiveness for things that we are repeatedly doing on purpose. And I don't know that's a good idea. I think that is a dangerous place to be. Okay? So the heart of God does not fear, or the heart after God, excuse me. The heart after God, I'll get this right, does not fear correction or even being wrong. Listen closely. It fears disappointing our Father. If you do not live in a state, people go, I don't want to live like that. Then what state do you live in? Because it sounds like you're heading into adultery. Remember, Israel was constantly playing the harlot? That's problematic. Yeah, that's problematic. And if you do not fear disappointing the Father, then you're not committed to him. Then you have no interest in reconciliation. You have no interest in relationship or covenant or communion or anything. You see, the true test of the heart that is under pressure is its willingness to receive input. Now, there are sometimes people will call and they'll ask for a ton of advice when they're going through something, and then, boop, they disappear. Be careful with that kind of scenario. All right? Be careful. You may be enabling things that you're not fully aware of. Okay? You may be seeing things through their eyes and not fully understanding the weight of their conduct. That's why you have to prayerfully move into those circumstances. When we are under pressure, how well do we deal with input? Do we blitz out? You know, some people do that when they're under a ton of pressure. You can't tell them anything because they're just you know, and it's a mess. It won't work. That's not a workable scenario for you. It is best when you start getting under pressure to recognize it. When you start feeling that tension, stop. Take a deep breath. There are times in the work that I do, and there's a lot of different things that I do, where the weight will be there, and I can feel like, how am I going to get this done? Blah, 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 blah. And then I go to one of my old sayings, which doesn't sound like a prayer, but to me, sometimes they are, which is like, hey, man, you know, Lord help, I just need to hit my marks. I need to do this. I need to keep chopping wood. And there's an aspect of consistency that has to be learned in this pursuit of Christ. And there are times you're going to have to multitask. There are times you're going to have to hyper-focus. There's going to be different things asked of you that are significant. And other times, it seems just mundane and pointless. All of them, I encourage you to meet with the mindset of Christ and watch what happens. The true test of a heart under pressure is its willingness to receive input. You see, we cannot claim to love a God we will not learn to serve. The heart is truly stuck when it wants only justice. It is truly free when it wants the joy of service and sacrifice. That is not to say there shouldn't be boundaries. Of course there should be. That is not to say there shouldn't be justice. What I am saying is it is important that you know the times and seasons. And if justice is the only thing you're focused on, you may not, and hear me very clearly, there are things that are right and just. We are to learn those. Listen closely. I'm talking about in conflict. Okay? If all you're looking for is justice, you will miss seasons that are right in front of you because your eyes are fixed on ultimately what's going to become vengeance. If you do the right things, and you remain faithful, the weight of the circumstance, that weight of that injury begins to be lifted because it's yielded. If someone is coming along and they're stumbling through this process trying to make something right, in the sense that, you know, not all our words are perfect, not all our understanding of things are great, and people that have not had a ton of input as it relates to getting along, be graceful, be merciful. On the other hand, if you're dealing with situations where it's full of leverage and manipulation, then be still and wait. If there's abuse, of course, either find help, or if you're able, address it. Of course. I wouldn't say not to. But do not get stuck in circumstances where there are injuries. And I'm not saying they aren't important. I'm not saying they aren't legitimate. But God knows the times and seasons. And you got to rest in that. You got to trust Him in the process. And you know me. You know me well enough to know if there are injustices that need to be addressed, addressed they shall be. If there are points that need to be made, points will be made. If there are fights that need to be fought, well, we'll probably fight them if God tells us to fight them. Last verse, Ephesians 4:25 through 28 says, therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth, each one of you with his neighbor. For we are members of one another. Be angry and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. And do not give the devil an opportunity. He who steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with one who has need. Listen to all of that idea. Whatever you were before, we are to stop. Whatever I was before, that's supposed to stop. Now we come to a different place, a different understanding. So what happens? What happens in the process if we're dealing with struggles that, whether they are physical or mental or whatever else, how do we become something other than what we are? Well, I would encourage you in this. If you are choosing things that overwhelm you, it is very difficult to change. If you're striving for things that, and I'm not saying don't grow. I'm not saying that. But if you're striving for things that put you out over to the edge to the point that you're going back to what you were, not good. It's not worth it. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world? What does it profit you to gain that position, that title, this, that, or the other, and not be able to manage it, and you lose context and relationship with God? It's not worth it. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Why would you seek power and authority that overwhelms your senses and moves you into a place that could be worse than where you were before? I don't know that it's worth it. Yeah, we're going to be different people. Some people are geared towards it. Some people can handle it. Don't compare yourself. Learn. You say, how do I learn? And I'm gonna close with this. I want to throw this in. Maybe it's biblical. I think watch and pray. You know what I mean? But if you're struggling with something right now and you're saying, Lord, I don't know which direction to go. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. What does the word tell us to do? It says, find those who are living a pattern, right? Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. Emulate them. Copy them. Okay? I'm not saying that you take I'm not talking about identity theft. All right? I'm talking about conforming to a pattern that is successful. So you have a history in drugs and problems with addiction. Maybe you have intermittent explosive anxiety thingamajogger, something. Surround yourself with people who don't. Surround yourself with people who haven't had those issues. Well, they don't understand me. No, you don't understand them. They make you anxious. They don't leave room for the things that we have left room for. They don't think through problems the way we think through problems. They don't respond the way that we respond. What if they see that I'm kind of still shading the truth and maybe a little bit of a liar? Good. Why? Because we're not supposed to be those things anymore. So hang in there. This is about eternity, y'all. You are an eternal being. And listen, for you and I, it's important. Schmucks don't get into heaven. All right? Liars, thieves, conjurers, the manipulative, these are not good things. They're not good things. Be careful how you live. Pay attention. Don't look for controversial figures to show you how to live a quiet life. Just doesn't work. Nonetheless, you're loved. I'm rooting for you. And I'm praying for you. Sunday morning, 11:15, Eagles Lodge here in Lodi. You can find it. Smack dab in the middle of everything. Anyway, hope to see you. Take care.